My son-in-law said, "I found your wife here," and my legs trembled and I felt the ground disappear. After years of peaceful routine, I receive a strange call from my son-in-law, and something in his voice put me on alert. I arrive at his Maita's house and see my wife's car parked, as if she had something to hide. In that moment I thought the worst, betrayal. But the truth was even harder to swallow. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The sun had not yet appeared on the horizon when Richard Thompson put on his worn-out sneakers from daily use. At 67, he maintained a discipline that many young people would envy. 3 years had passed since he left his position as supervisor at the auto parts factory, where he worked for more than 4 decades. Retirement, which for many meant rest, for him represented a new challenge: how to fill the empty hours that were previously occupied by work. The answer came in the form of a rigorous routine of morning walks. Every day, without fail, he traveled, the same route through the middle-class neighborhood where he had lived since marrying Martha, his companion of 45 years. On that autumn morning, while adjusting his wristwatch, he couldn't imagine that his life was about to change dramatically. "I'll be back in an hour, Martha," he announced to his wife, who was finishing preparing coffee. "All right, dear. I'm going to take advantage and go to the market." "We're out of fruit," she replied, avoiding looking him directly in the eyes. Richard hesitated for a moment, noticing something different in his wife's tone of voice, but soon dismissed the impression. He opened the door and was greeted by the fresh morning air. The streets were still deserted, except for some workers heading to bus stops and other early-rising retirees like him. During the walk, his thoughts wandered to the past. He remembered his daughter, Jessica, who was now married to Mike for 5 years. His son-in-law had always seemed like a good guy to him, hard-working, polite, and attentive to Jessica. They had a cordial relationship, even if they weren't exactly close. Sunday family gatherings were pleasant, but rarely delved into personal matters. Upon returning home, he found it empty. Martha had really gone out. He found it strange, as she usually waited for him to return so they could go to the market together. He took a long shower and prepared a hearty breakfast. He sat on the porch with the day's newspaper and remained there for almost 2 hours, until the shrill ring of the telephone broke the silence of the house. "Hello? Mr. Thompson?" Mike's tense voice sounded from the other end of the line. "I need you to come here. It's important." "Did something happen to Jessica?" he asked, feeling his heart race. "No, she's at work. It's something else. I prefer to talk in person." Richard hung up the phone with a growing sense of discomfort. In 40 minutes, he was parking his car in front of his daughter's house in the neighboring district. To his surprise, he recognized Martha's vehicle parked on the sidewalk. A chill ran down his spine. When he rang the doorbell, it was Mike who answered. The 32-year-old man looked worn out, with deep circles under his eyes and an unshaven beard that didn't match his usual, impeccable appearance. "Come in." "Please," said Mike, leading him to the living room. There was Martha sitting on the sofa, with her hands crossed on her lap and an expression of anguish on her face. When she saw her husband, her eyes watered. "What's going on here?" Richard demanded, looking from one to the other. His first thought was as absurd as it was painful. Were they having an affair? The idea was ridiculous, but why so much secrecy? "Sit here, Richard," Martha asked, indicating the place beside her. "We have a delicate situation to discuss." Mike remained standing, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on the floor. "About 3 months ago," Martha began, carefully choosing her words, "Mike lost his job. The company he worked for made a big cut in staff." Richard looked at his son-in-law, surprised. In the family gatherings of the last few months, Mike had always talked about work as if everything was normal. "And why didn't anyone tell me this?" "Because I asked them not to," interrupted Mike, finally finding the courage to speak. "I thought I would get another job quickly. I didn't want to worry anyone, especially Jessica, who is pregnant." The news of the pregnancy caught Richard by surprise. "Jessica is pregnant? Since when?" 3 months, Martha replied. "They were going to tell you at her birthday next week. It would be a surprise." Richard felt excluded, as if he were a stranger in his own family. "And what does this have to do with you being here, Martha? Why all this secrecy?" Martha exchanged a look with Mike before continuing. "Mike is not just unemployed, Richard. He's dealing with severe depression. In the last few weeks, he's been having anxiety attacks and very negative thoughts." "I couldn't be alone anymore," admitted Mike with a choked voice. "It was becoming dangerous. I called your mother one day, desperate, and she started coming every day after Jessica left for work." "Every day," Richard repeated in disbelief. "So that's why you've been leaving the house so much, to come here and take care of Mike?" "Yes," confirmed Martha. "We're waiting for an appointment with a psychiatrist through the health insurance, but the waiting list is long. Meanwhile, we couldn't leave him alone, and we also didn't want to overburden Jessica at this delicate time of pregnancy." Richard felt a mixture of emotions: concern for his son-in-law's condition, hurt at having been kept in the dark, and a pang of anger for the betrayal of trust. "Why didn't you tell me? I'm part of this family, aren't I? I was afraid of your reaction," confessed Martha. "You've always been so pragmatic. I thought you would tell Mike to control himself or be a man. Depression isn't something you easily understand, Richard." Martha's words hit him like a punch. It was true that he had difficulty understanding emotional issues. He grew up in a time when men didn't talk about feelings, but to be excluded in this way? "And now, why did you decide to tell me?" It was Mike who answered, "Because it's not working. Jessica started to become suspicious of your mother's outings. She asked questions. We don't want any more secrets, and we need help from the whole family." At that moment, they heard the sound of keys in the door. Jessica was coming home early from work. Upon entering the living room and seeing the three gathered with tense expressions, she stopped, confused. "What's going on here?" Jessica remained motionless for a few seconds, her eyes scanning each face present in the room. Her expression changed from confusion to concern when she noticed her husband's deep dark circles and her mother's red eyes. "Is someone going to tell me what's happening?" she asked, leaving her purse on the side table. "Dad, what are you doing here? And Mum, I thought you were at home." A heavy silence dominated the environment. Mike was the first to speak, walking to his wife and holding her hands gently. "We need to talk, Jessica. There are some things you need to know." Richard observed the scene with a mixture of apprehension and compassion. Despite his hurt at having been excluded, he could see the suffering stamped on his son-in-law's face. He remembered what it was like to be young and feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, the pressure to be the provider, to never fail. "Let's all sit down," suggested Martha, indicating the larger sofa. During the next hour, Mike, his voice breaking several times, revealed to his wife everything he had hidden in the last few months: the dismissal, the depression that had silently set in, the dark thoughts that dominated him when he was alone, and how her mother had become his safe harbor during the mornings. "Why didn't you tell me?" asked Jessica, tears flowing freely down her face. "I'm your wife. We're expecting a child. How could you hide something so serious from me?" "I didn't want to worry you," Mike replied, his voice almost inaudible. "Pregnancy is already difficult enough. You've been dealing with nausea, tiredness, and on top of that, you're supporting the household alone." "I was ashamed, Jessica. Ashamed of having failed as a husband, as a future father." Jessica released Mike's hands and abruptly stood up, walking to the window. The afternoon sun illuminated, her face wet with tears. "And you two?" She turned to her parents. "How could you participate in this lie? Mom, you came here every day to stay with Mike and never thought it was important to let me know my husband was facing a crisis." "Daughter, we just wanted to protect you," justified Martha, visibly shaken by her daughter's reaction. "The doctor said stress isn't good for pregnancy. We thought we could resolve this quickly, get adequate treatment for Mike before I found out," interrupted Jessica with bitterness in her voice. "You decided for me, as if I were a child incapable of dealing with reality. This is my house, my marriage, my life." Richard, who until then had remained silent, got up and approached his daughter. Jessica, I just found out about all this too. Martha didn't tell me anything. I believe everyone here acted thinking they were doing what was best, even if in a misguided way. The young woman looked at her father in surprise. You didn't know either? No, I received a call from Mike today and came immediately. I found your mother here, and only then did I understand why she had been acting so strange lately. Jessica seemed to process the information for a few moments. Her gaze softened a bit when she realized that she wasn't the only one who had been kept in the dark. This doesn't diminish what you did, she said finally, turning to Mike and Martha. You broke my trust. How can I believe anything you tell me now? Mike approached hesitantly but didn't dare touch his wife. I know I was wrong, Jessica, but I am afraid. Afraid of not being the man you deserve. Afraid of not being able to be a good father to our child. Daughter, Martha's voice was almost a whisper, your father is right. We thought we were protecting you, but we only managed to create more problems. You have every right to be hurt. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. With one hand on her still almost imperceptible belly, she looked at each person present. We need to establish some rules here. First, I don't want any more secrets in this family. Second, we're going to seek professional help, not just for Mike, but for all of us. And third, I'm the one who decides what I can or cannot bear. Understood? The three nodded in silence, recognizing the surprising strength that emanated from that 29-year-old woman. Mike, she continued, sitting next to her husband, I love you. We're in this together, but I can't help if you don't let me in. He nodded, finally allowing himself to cry openly. Jessica hugged him, and in that simple gesture was forgiveness and the promise of better days. Richard and Martha exchanged glances. There was much to be discussed between them as well. The broken trust would not be restored overnight. In the weeks that followed, the family began a painful but necessary process of reconstruction. They found a psychiatrist who agreed to see Mike urgently, even if private, sacrificing part of the savings they were keeping for the baby's layette. Richard, contrary to his previous conceptions about nerve problems, insisted on accompanying his son-in-law to the first consultation. Depression is not fussiness or weakness, explained Dr. Paul, a grey-haired gentleman with a calm voice. It's a disease like any other, which affects brain chemistry and needs proper treatment. Those words provoked a silent revolution in the way Richard viewed the situation. For years, he had believed that emotional problems were just a lack of willpower. Now, seeing Mike's real suffering, he began to question his old convictions. The medication treatment was started immediately, but the doctor made it clear that the medicines would not work miracles alone. A joint effort would be necessary: therapy, family support, and changes in lifestyle. Physical activity is essential, recommended the doctor. It helps release natural endorphins and improves mood. Richard saw an opportunity there. Mike, how about joining me on morning walks? No pressure, just to stretch the legs a bit. The invitation, made awkwardly by a man little accustomed to showing affection, meant more to Mike than any word of consolation. It was a concrete gesture, a hand extended at the moment he needed it most. I would like that, Mr. Thompson. Thank you. At home, Martha and Richard also faced their own issues. On a particularly difficult night after returning from their daughter's house, Richard finally expressed what was bothering him. Why didn't you trust me, Martha? After so many years together, you thought I wouldn't be able to understand. Martha, sitting on the edge of the bed, seemed small and fragile. You've always been so practical, Richard. You've always believed that problems are solved with hard work and discipline. When Mike first called me saying he couldn't even get out of bed, I was afraid of your reaction, afraid you would judge him as weak. I'm not a monster, Martha, he replied, hurt. I may have my flaws, but I would never turn my back on someone in the family who needs help. I know that now, she admitted, holding her husband's hand. You surprised me today. The way you welcomed Mike, how you talked to Jessica. I saw a side of you that I had forgotten existed. The morning dawned cold when Richard waited on the porch of his house. The clock marked 6:15, and he checked the time for the third time in the last 5 minutes. He adjusted his cap and tightened the shoelaces of his sneakers, gestures he performed mechanically while his thoughts wandered. Would Mike really be willing to accompany him on the morning walk, or had it just been an agreement out of politeness? His questions were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk. Mike was approaching, wearing gray sweatpants and a simple t-shirt. He seemed to have made an effort to be there, but fatigue was still visible in his eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," he greeted with a half smile. "I hope I'm not late." "Right on time," replied his father-in-law, trying to sound natural, although he felt strangely nervous. "We'll start slowly today, no rush." The two men began the walk in silence. Richard, accustomed to his own company during this daily ritual, didn't know exactly how to break the ice. Mike, in turn, seemed focused on simply putting one foot in front of the other, as if each step required a conscious effort. After a few blocks, it was his son-in-law who spoke first. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to thank you for this. I know you like to walk alone." "It's nothing," Richard replied with a dismissive gesture. "It's actually good to have company once in a while. Martha always says I talk too much to the birds in the park." The attempt at humor drew a genuine smile from Mike, something Richard hadn't seen in weeks. "The doctor said it will take a while for the medications to take full effect," commented Mike, as they turned the corner towards the small neighborhood park. "But just being able to get out of bed today, I already feel different." Richard nodded, carefully choosing his next words. "When I retired, I went through a difficult period too. It wasn't depression like yours, but I felt useless, as if everything I knew how to do no longer served any purpose." Mike looked at his father-in-law in surprise. In 5 years of living together, he had never heard him talk about feelings in this way. "And how did you overcome it?" "One day at a time," replied Richard, pointing to the path ahead. "I created routines like this walk. I started helping in the Neighborhood Residents Association. I discovered that I still had a lot to offer, just in different ways." They walked a few more minutes in comfortable silence, until Mike asked the question he had been rehearsing since the night before. "Do you think I'll be able to be a good father with all this happening?" Richard stopped walking and looked his son-in-law directly in the eyes. "Mike, I know many men who never had depression and were terrible fathers. And I know others who faced all kinds of difficulties and raised wonderful children. What makes the difference is not what you face, but how you choose to face it." Those simple words, coming from a man that Mike had always seen as pragmatic and even a bit rigid, touched him deeply. His eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. "Shall we continue?" suggested Richard, resuming his pace. "There's a new bakery 3 blocks ahead. We could try their coffee." The following week, as the new routine was slowly being established, Jessica arrived home earlier carrying a small bag. She found Mike sitting on the porch, leafing through the newspaper that Richard had left earlier, after their walk. "I have a surprise," she announced, sitting next to her husband. Mike looked curiously at the bag she placed on the table. "I had the ultrasound today. I didn't want to call you to not spoil the surprise." Mike's heart raced when she took out of the bag a sealed envelope containing the images from the exam. "Do you want to open it?" With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and removed the black and white images. To inexperienced eyes, it might seem like just a set of spots, but for those parents, it was the first glimpse of their long-awaited child. "It's a girl," revealed Jessica, with shining eyes. "The doctor is sure." Mike gently ran his fingers over the image, as if he could touch his daughter through the paper. An intense emotion invaded him, different from the apathy that had accompanied him in recent weeks, different also from the anxiety that sometimes suffocated him. It was something luminous, warm. "A girl," he repeated, savoring the words. "Our daughter." Jessica carefully observed her husband's reactions, relieved to see that spark of life returning to his eyes. "I thought of some names," she commented cautiously, "but I wanted us to choose together." Mike nodded, still absorbing the news. "How about your grandmother's name, the one you always talk about with such affection?" "Emily?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered?" "Of course. She was important to you, and the stories you tell about her always seemed special to me." Mike held his wife's hand. Emily Thompson Miller. Sounds good, don't you think? That night, the couple decided to celebrate the news with a simple but meaningful dinner. They invited Richard and Martha, who arrived carrying a small package, the first gift for their granddaughter. "It's just a blanket," explained Martha, as Jessica unwrapped the soft fabric in pastel tones. "I started knitting as soon as I knew about the pregnancy." The evening passed with a lightness they hadn't felt in months. They talked about the future, about the baby's room that would need to be prepared, about girl names. For a few hours, the shadows that hung over the family seemed to dissipate. However, Mike's journey was just beginning. 2 weeks after starting treatment, he faced an intense episode of anxiety that prevented him from leaving the house for the morning walk. Richard, concerned about his son-in-law's absence, went to his house and found him sitting in the dark of the living room, paralyzed by fear. "I don't know what's happening," confessed Mike with a trembling voice. "Yesterday I was feeling good, and today it feels like there's a crushing weight on my chest. I can't breathe properly." Richard sat down beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "Did you take your medication today?" "No," admitted Mike. "I thought I didn't need it anymore. I was feeling better in the last few days." Richard sighed, remembering the doctor's emphatic recommendations about the importance of not interrupting treatment on his own. "Let's do this. Take the medicine now, and then we'll take a short walk, just to the end of the street and back. What do you think?" Mike hesitated but ended up agreeing. That small step, leaving the house even when everything in his being screamed to stay curled up in the dark, was fundamental. In the days that followed, Richard adapted his routine to spend more time with his son-in-law, not only on walks, but also helping with small domestic projects. Together, they began to prepare the baby's room. Richard, who had always had skill with woodworking, taught Mike to build a simple shelf for the future granddaughter's books and toys. The project, which could be completed in a weekend by someone with experience, became a ritual of almost a month. Each afternoon, they worked a few hours, talking about light subjects or simply enjoying the shared silence. "Mr. Thompson," said Mike on one of those afternoons while sanding one of the shelves, "I think I never properly thanked you for everything you've been doing." The older man, focused on adjusting a hinge, took a few seconds to respond. "You don't need to thank me. It's what family does." Those simple words carried a profound meaning. For the first time, Mike felt truly part of that family, not just as Jessica's husband, but as someone who belonged, who was accepted with his frailties. "Still, thank you. I don't know where I would be without you all." Richard just nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion that threatened to show on his face. For a man of his generation, raised to hide feelings, those moments of shared vulnerability were unknown territory. The 6th month of pregnancy brought new changes to the family. Jessica's belly was already quite prominent, and Emily's movements inside the maternal womb became perceptible to everyone. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, while the family gathered for the traditional lunch, Mike felt for the first time his daughter kick against his hand. "She's agitated today," commented Jessica, guiding her husband's hand to another point on her belly. "I think she's going to be a soccer player." Richard, who observed the scene with a discreet smile, made a mental note to buy a small ball as soon as his granddaughter was born. He would never admit it out loud, but he had already set aside a space in his garage for the girl's future toys. Martha, in turn, seemed lighter in recent times. The reconciliation with her husband had been gradual, small daily gestures of renewed trust, sincere conversations before sleeping, shared plans for the future. That morning, she surprised everyone by announcing that she had enrolled in a BIR first aid course for grandmothers. "You never know when it might be useful," she justified, while serving another portion of salad to her husband. "And besides, I met other future grandmothers. We're thinking of forming a support group in the neighborhood." Mike's treatment progressed with ups and downs. The medications had been adjusted twice, and the weekly therapy sessions became an essential part of his routine. The psychiatrist had explained that recovery wouldn't be linear. There would be good days and bad days, and that was okay. What no one expected, however, was the call that Mike received on an ordinary Tuesday. It was his former boss, informing him that a position had opened at the company where he had previously worked. It was a full-time position with greater responsibilities than he had before. "They want me to start in 2 weeks," Mike told the Hi'i. Family gathered in the living room after dinner. His expression was a mixture of pride and apprehension. The salary is better, but the workload is also greater. "That's wonderful, love," exclaimed Jessica, hugging him. But soon she noticed his hesitation. "You don't seem very excited. Is something worrying you?" Mike took a deep breath before answering, looking briefly at Richard as if seeking support. "What if I can't do it? What if the pressure is too much and I go back to that state? Emily is due to be born in less than 3 months. What if I fail you all again?" Richard, who until then had remained quiet, leaned forward in his armchair. "Mike, you didn't fail anyone. You faced an illness, just as anyone can face, and you're treating yourself. You're following all the medical recommendations." "Your father is right," agreed Martha gently. "Besides, now you have a support network. You're not alone in this." Jessica held her husband's hands between hers, looking him in the eyes with determination. "I have a proposal. Accept the job, but with one condition, a 30-day trial period. If you feel it's too much, you can back out without guilt. Meanwhile, we'll maintain our contingency plan, with medical follow-up and family support." The sensibility of the proposal surprised everyone, especially Richard. His daughter, who had always seemed impulsive and emotional to him, now demonstrated a maturity he hadn't noticed before. Perhaps the prospect of becoming a mother had awakened in her a strength and wisdom that had been dormant until then. Mike considered the proposal for a few moments before slowly nodding. "I'll try. For you all, for Emily, and for myself." The following weeks were of adjustments and preparations. Mike resumed his professional life, facing the challenge of explaining his prolonged absence to colleagues. To his surprise, he found understanding where he expected judgment. One of the company directors, a man of few words and austere appearance, called him for a private conversation on his second day. "My oldest son went through something similar at 25, revealed the executive, completely breaking the image Mike had of him. "I know how difficult it is. If you need flexibility at any point, my door is open." That unexpected conversation reinforced something that Mike had been learning. In recent months, mental suffering was not exclusive to a few weak ones as he had believed for so long. It was a reality that touched many more lives than one could imagine, hidden under forced smiles and prolonged silences. The 8th month of pregnancy arrived with a new concern: the proximity of childbirth. Jessica, always so confident, began to express anxiety about the moment of birth. Mike, in turn, feared not being able to be the support that his wife would need. "What if I faint in the delivery room?" he asked Richard during one of their walks, now reduced to 3 times a week due to the new job. "Or worse, what if I have an anxiety attack just when Jessica needs me the most?" His father-in-law, who over the months had become an unlikely confidant, gave an answer that Mike would never forget. "You know what my father told me when Jessica was born and I was terrified? Son, you just need to be present. Life teaches the rest." And he was right. No one is born knowing how to be a father or mother. We learn day by day, making mistakes, sometimes getting it right, but always trying to do our best. The simple wisdom of those words accompanied Mike during the final weeks of waiting. Emily's room was ready, with the shelf that he and Richard had built occupying a prominent place. The layette, modest but complete, awaited the arrival of the little one. It was on a Wednesday dawn that the contractions began. Jessica, who slept restlessly, woke Mike with a gentle touch on the shoulder. "I think it's time," she said with surprising calm. Mike felt his heart race. The moment he both feared and longed for had finally arrived. With trembling hands, he picked up the cell phone to call his in-laws, as agreed. It was Richard who answered, his voice alert despite the hour. "We're leaving right now. Calm down, son. Everything will be fine." That son pronounced naturally by Richard, produced an immediate effect on Mike. A feeling of belonging, of security. He wasn't alone in that journey. At the hospital, while Jessica was being prepared for delivery, Mike faced his deepest fears. Anxiety threatened to dominate him a few times, especially when doctors mentioned the possibility of an emergency cesarean due to the baby's position. In those moments, he closed his eyes and repeated to himself the words he had learned in therapy. I am safe. I can face this. One step at a time. Richard remained in the waiting room, walking from one side to the other, reliving in his mind the birth of his own daughter decades ago. Martha held a rosary between her fingers, her lips moving in silent prayers. After 6 hours of labor, Emily Thompson Miller arrived in the world with a strong and healthy cry. When the nurse placed the small bundle in Mike's arms, something transformed inside him. The insecurities, the fears, the constant feeling of inadequacy, everything seemed to diminish before that little red and wrinkled face. "Hello, Emily," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm your father." In the months that followed Emily's birth, the family found a new balance. Mike continued at his job where he surprisingly stood out, receiving recognition for his performance in the 5th month. The anxiety attacks didn't completely disappear, but became less frequent and intense. The therapeutic follow-up continued, now bi-weekly, and the medications were gradually adjusted. Jessica returned to work after maternity leave, and the couple established a rotation routine in caring for their daughter. Richard and Martha became a constant presence, especially in the late afternoons, when they picked up their granddaughter from daycare so that the parents could work 1 more hour without worries. On a particularly significant afternoon, when Emily completed 6 months, the family gathered for a small celebration. While watching his daughter in his father-in-law's arms, who was telling her stories that she certainly didn't understand, Mike reflected on the journey of the last few months. "What are you thinking about?" asked Jessica, sitting next to him on the sofa. "How everything changed, how we changed." She nodded, following his gaze towards Richard, who was now making faces to draw laughter from his granddaughter. "Dad is unrecognizable. Who would have thought that that stern man would transform into this silly grandfather?" Mike smiled. "I think we all discovered sides of ourselves that we didn't know." Indeed, the experience had transformed each of them. Richard, who had always been reserved and pragmatic, discovered a capacity for welcoming that even he didn't know he possessed. Martha, so accustomed to protecting everyone around her, learned to trust more in others' decisions. Jessica developed a patience and understanding that contrasted with her former impulsive temperament, and Mike had traveled the longest path, from shame to pride, from despair to hope, from isolation to deep connection with his family. That night, after putting Emily to sleep, he found Richard on the porch, contemplating the stars with a cup of tea in his hands. "Mr. Thompson, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "Did you really go through a difficult period after retirement, or did you say that just to make me feel better?" The older man smiled, taking a sip of tea before answering. "It was real. Not as intense as yours, but yes, I felt lost for a while. I worked my whole life since I was 14. Suddenly, not having somewhere to go every morning, it was like losing a part of myself." Mike nodded, understanding perfectly that feeling. "And how did you overcome it?" Richard looked inside the house, where Martha was tidying up the kitchen while humming softly, and then to the room where his granddaughter slept. "I realized that my life hadn't ended. It had just changed, and that I could choose how to live this new chapter." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "You know, Mike, I think that in the end, that's what life is about. Not avoiding the storms, but learning to dance in the rain." The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Mike and his family has deeply touched your hearts. We know that many of you also face your own silent challenges, your internal battles that few understand. To continue this journey of stories that reflect the complexity of life, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving narratives. Find it here by clicking on the left side of the screen. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Daily we bring unique stories that explore the ups and downs of human experience, always with sensitivity and respect. Share your own experiences in the comments. Your story might be the beacon